Hi, it's about a half hour before I have to leave for work, and I'm home with no one else except the dog, so I don't think he's going to mind my rambling. But I thought I would review the material that I'm going to cover today in lecture, and I'll just turn the video recorder on, and that way you can have a video in case you want to review this again outside of class. So I've already navigated to a folder in the file system where I have the spreadsheet, and I'm going to go ahead and open it up. It's been set up to automatically display the graphical user interface. We saw that in the other video, so there it is. And you can see there's lots of buttons, and I do a number of different things here. I will quickly step through the code and then leave it to you to review this in more detail, and you'll get a copy of this, so you'll be able to not only see the code on the video but also actually have the spreadsheet itself. So let me take a look at what's going on here. Number one, if you peek behind the scenes here, you'll see that this time I have a spreadsheet with 3 worksheets, and I continue to use the default names, although a right click some other point in time. A right click on these will provide a menu where you can rename them. So if you want to write more descriptive code, that might be advisable. But the program I've written then will use various sheets, and it's going to just do some fundamental things that I think many programs you'll need to know how to do for many applications. So this isn't going to do anything spectacular, just real fundamental things. So for instance, I have a button over here to display Hello World. And what you'll see here in a moment is that I've used a message box. And if you pay attention to sheet 1, I believe when I respond to this message box, it's going to do what the first program example, or the first video did, and will write Hello World in cell A1. Another thing that I have is buttons that will allow me to switch from one sheet to another. So it's currently accessing sheet 1. If I click here, it sets the focus on sheet 2, and again back to sheet 1, and I also have the ability to get to sheet 3. I have a button that will write some initial values to sheet 1 and sheet 2, so we will be able to then see what it's written to sheet 1 in the background, switch to sheet 2, see that it's written something else. I have something that allows me to clear out the worksheets. So if you've written a value to a cell or to some cells and you want to get rid of the values and reset, you have the ability to do that. And again, if I switch back to sheet 1, it has made changes on both sheets. And actually I do it 2 different ways. We can look at the program code here, but it's possible to clear the cells 2 different ways: by assigning an empty string or by executing a clear method. And then finally, well, it's not actually finally. Another thing that I have here is a panel where I've put some text boxes and a button that allow me to enter in a value from the keyboard. So I'll type in a value of 12 or something and provide another value. Okay, so I menu in and subtrahend, and when I calculate the difference, hopefully I'll get a value of 9. It tells me the difference is 9 through a message box. And apparently it also writes some of those values over here on sheet 2. Okay, so it's been a while since I wrote this program code, so I'm kind of rediscovering what it does here. And then I also have the ability to do a bulk copy, and I don't know whether I'll get into this today or not. This is something that I really just looked up on the internet. I think I used the Stack Overflow website to see how this was done, and the effect is that it will copy things from one sheet to another, okay? And I can't remember whether it does the bulk copy from sheet 1 or from sheet 2, so I'm going to go ahead and initialize, and that's going to populate both sheet 1 and sheet 2, and then when I do the bulk copy, it's going to apparently transfer from, looks like, sheet 2, okay? And that's something that's going to be necessary in your project. I'm going to have you take some of the data, put it on one sheet, take some of the data, put it on another sheet, and you'll see the details of that. But when it comes time to transfer a block of data from one sheet to another, the code behind this button will probably be very helpful. Alright, so let me take a look at the program code itself. So I now have access to the worksheet when I stop the GUI, and if I go back to the Developer tab, click on Visual Basic, it's going to open the project. I will display the form, and let's take these in no particular order, okay? Switching from sheet to sheet is a fairly simple thing, and I'll demonstrate the code behind this button and its equivalent code behind this button. So as we look at the code, really one line of code right there, all I'm doing is activating that particular sheet. So I'm invoking the activate method on that particular sheet of the workbook object, and that was demonstrated in the first video. Alright, so switching from sheet to sheet just puts the focus on the sheets. We saw an example of how this both displays hello world through a message box and writes to cell A1. So if I look at the program code behind here, you'll see that I start out with some comment statements. Comment statements in BASIC don't begin with // they begin with a single quote. And then beyond that, for safety's sake here, I set the focus on sheet 1. I execute a message box display right here. So the syntax of this is different than it is in other Visual Studio programs. And then I'm using a range object here. So there's actually a couple of different ways that I can set focus on a cell. Generally speaking, using the cells object is going to be the one that is most convenient to use as you're writing program code, because if you recall, it has two indices, and an index for the row and another index for the column. And so whereas in the first example I just stuck in two numeric constants, 1 and 1, I can instead plug in variables and then change that value, thereby allowing the cell pointer to move under the direction of my program. And you'll see examples of that probably next week. But the range object has its place in that it will allow you to reference a block of code. So that bulk copy button that transfers a block of data from one sheet to another is using the range object. So I can reference a cell by its cell address in this fashion, but again, I point that out. If I'm actually doing this in some program that's doing something important, I would, under these circumstances, more than likely use the cells object. Alright, so I think that should be clear as to what that does. And if we look at the initialize button here, let me double click, what you're going to see is that the click event method has but one statement. So I didn't, this is getting back to the idea of using private methods and writing the program code so that it's not overly dense and complicated, and also so it's in a unit that can be reused. So all the things that we might have, said in CPSC 1400 that were good about private methods, I can use the equivalent of private methods, private subroutines. I'm making a void type method call to a private method that I've written called add stuff. And wherever add stuff might be, right there it is. Lots of comments, statements. And then add stuff is going to set the focus on sheet 2. And then it's going to use both the range and the cells way of referencing cells and moving the cell pointer. Okay, so hopefully those two lines of code are, moving it to the cell pointer to different locations, but nevertheless, basically the same kind of statements. And I'm assigning values, just numeric, using numeric constants here, assigning those to those two particular cells. Then I switch over to sheet 1 and do the same kind of thing with different numeric values. Okay, so I think that's probably pretty straightforward and easy to understand. And when we look at clearing using assignment statement, okay, so I have some comments, I activate a sheet, I assign an empty string to these two cells, and then I activate the next sheet and assign an empty string to a range. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm assigning a value to cells A1, A2, A3. So if I need to perform some task like copy a block of cells, or more appropriately the spreadsheet term for a block of cells would be a range of cells. So if I need to reference a range of cells, affect a range of cells, the range object's probably going to be the preferred way to do that. And again, I'm with one statement assigning an empty string to cells A1, A2, and A3. And so these need to be contiguous cells in order to use the range object. And then I also blank out the text boxes, and that should be fairly straightforward there. And let's see what else is left. There's a clear method. I'm going to skip over that. You can look at the program code. And when I come over here and take a look at the bulk copy code. Now, again, this code over here, I wrote myself. This code, I, wasn't sure how to do it. So I did a Google search on copying a range of cells from one sheet to another or something. Couldn't tell you exactly what my Google search was, how I worded it exactly, but nevertheless, with just a little bit of effort, I was able to read through, and I'm pretty sure it was Stack Overflow's website, and found this code. Okay, so what is it doing? Well, it's going to use that range object. Okay, and so it sets focus on the sheet where the data resides, sheet 2, and then it's going to execute a copy command. Okay, so there is a copy method that can be employed on the range object, and notice again that the argument is a cell range, string value that represents a cell range. Then I set focus on the destination sheet, sheet 3, place the cell pointer in cell A1, and notice that the range object also has a select method which will put the cell pointer on a particular location. And then there is a okay, so I had copied the source data with the copy method, and once I set focus on the destination sheet, I have a way of pasting by invoking the active sheet object's paste method. And then finally, I wasn't sure what this did exactly, and so I commented it out, ran the program, then went in and looked at the worksheets, and what I found to be the case was that once I had executed the method, everything transferred properly, it copied, but when I exited out of the form and actually looked at the source worksheet, worksheet 2, the data that was selected, that range of A1, A2, and A3, was highlighted. There was like a marquee around it. And so when I then made this statement active, uncommented, and ran it again, I noticed that it worked just the same, except it got rid of that active cell notation. And if you've used a spreadsheet before and done any copying, you know what I'm talking about. If you copy and paste, the source cells that you select remain active, and there's like a little marquee that goes around the border to notate that. This basically turns the marquee off. It makes the cells that have been previously selected unselected, shall we say. Alright, so I think that pretty much is the program in a nutshell, and I'll go ahead and record this and then make this video available to you so that in your own time, whenever it's convenient, you can review it again.